Namaste, everybody, and welcome to this second session on the Bangladesh issue. This is the 50th year of the Bangladesh liberation of war, as well as the 50th year of the painful birth of Bangladesh. So we have planned a series of talks starting with March 25th when we first hosted our first talk covering some of the issues that went into the creation of Bangladesh. Today, we have a very interesting panel, guest with us, Mr. Julian Francis, who goes by the name Julian Bhai because he lives in Bangladesh and has made that his home. And he has witnessed the birth of Bangladesh and the creation of its entire country, as a liberated country, and worked in the development of the country, as well as handled some of the refugee crisis during that time. So welcome, Julian Bhai. And I'm so delighted to have you and so honored to have you today to share with us your experiences. I want to share a little bit about you with the guest. Julian Bhai has been for a long time with Oxfam, and during especially the Bangladesh liberation war, he was at the forefront of the refugee management, and he has helped and seen as a first-time eyewitness the crisis that occurred. One of the largest refugee crises that ever occurred in the world was at the borders between Bangladesh and India. And I guess that would be one of the questions we would ask you, Julian Bhai, about how that crisis was handled and what you went through. But other than that, you have lived in Bangladesh and also been a friend of Bangladesh and written many columns about the issues there, and especially the war of liberation. So I will hand over the floor to you to share a little bit about your background and the reason you chose to continue to live in Bangladesh, and your just a little bit about you. That would be great. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be in touch with people, even if they're thousands of miles away. Briefly, I came to India as an agricultural animal husbandry volunteer on an village agricultural development program following a very severe famine in Bihar, in eastern India, in the late 1960s. And so we had a big development program with the Gandhians, with the mostly with untouchable castes. So I had already been there for 3 years working with the Harijans, and I was based actually with an ashram in Bodh Gaya, the birthplace of Buddhism. And then, of course, there was the very enormous and tragic cyclone in November 1970. And immediately after that, the general election, which was won by the Awami League, and then everything developed politically after that. And we realized, although we were not, as an individual, I was not involved or likely to be involved with anything to do with East Pakistan as it was then. And but very soon in February and March, with the political heat boiling up, then we learnt more about it through the media, through the BBC. The BBC covered Sheikh Mujib's March the 7th speech, which was almost like a call for independence. And but then very soon after that, as you know, the very bloody crackdown on March the 25th night. And then we had an office, Oxfam had an office in Bihar covering eastern India and East Pakistan, and they soon got messages that thousands of people were fleeing across the border. And so Oxfam had a number of NGO partners, mission hospitals, and others in the border areas. And then we realized, or Oxfam realized, that there was a big crisis, and we were asked to go to the border areas, and we sent back telegrams to Oxfam's headquarters in Oxford, UK, and to the field office in Bihar that I had been at a particular border crossing, and that particular day 20 or 30,000 Bangladeshis had come across. So Oxford didn't believe this. They thought that the telegram operator had added a zero by mistake, and it was only meant to be 2,000. So this led to clarifications very quickly, and immediately a relief operation had to be set up. And before we actually were able to start our own operation, we were supporting people like Mother Teresa and her medical mission sisters who were going out regularly to the refugee camps near Calcutta. And for a few weeks after I had tried to set up an office for Oxfam in Calcutta, Mother Teresa would phone me at the same time every morning with a shopping list of what they needed, which we would procure and provide the following day. And it was a phone call that wasn't good morning, Julian, how are you? It would just be, God bless you, Julian, and then a shopping list. So that was the beginning. And then, of course, later on, through our Gandhian connections, which were very good, we got much better organized and developed a big program, the biggest relief operation Oxfam had ever done in its history until then. And eventually we decided that as most of the other foreign agencies, British, European, American, were covering refugees not far away from Calcutta, we went much further away. So we were in Tripura and Meghalaya, Assam, and Cooch Behar in the north of West Bengal, Jalpaiguri, Siliguri, those places. And we were able to have a remarkable program because we said, much to the anger of people in Oxfam's head office, that we didn't believe we needed lots of white faces flying in, because we could organize Indian doctors and final year medical students, and through the Gandhian ashrams of different parts of the country, then we had a lot of volunteers to be involved with sanitation and feeding and setting up informal schools. So that was the beginning of what we did.
Okay. No, that's interesting to know, because we always thought that this was largely a Bengal, East Bengal versus the West Bengal situation. But according to you, there has been an influx of a lot of the refugees even further into the northeastern states of India. So it was a very big operation, and I guess a lot of a lot of the the deaths and the issues that happened during that time of sanitation, of disease, of health, I think those have been related in a document that you helped prepare, the testimony of 60, right? Before that, I do want to talk, just remind people how this whole campaign began. It happened because Mujibur Rahman won the very first election that ever was held in Pakistan. So it was East Pakistan and West Pakistan, and the elections were not held until then. I think India had started conducting its own democratic election and process maybe a decade or maybe more than that before, right? Or in the 50s itself. Whereas in Pakistan, this was the very first election that was held. Mujibur Rahman won with a heavy landslide, and that really created the need for a civil war. Am I right? I just thought maybe I'll get your views on that.
Well, that's right. I mean, there was for very short time they did set up a democratic system. So they had a president and prime minister, and in fact, one of the prime ministers in the 1950s was a Bengali, and there was a proposal in those days that when the president was from West Pakistan, from Punjab, basically, the prime minister would be from Bengal and vice versa. And that never got off the ground because there were military coups and takeovers and so on. So the result of the general election in 1971, well, because there were more parliamentary seats, national parliamentary seats in what was East Pakistan because of the population being bigger than West Pakistan. So then when the Awami League won almost 100% of all the parliamentary seats in East Pakistan, then the Awami League had the majority, and therefore Sheikh Mujib was quite right to claim that he would be prime minister. So, but then, as we know, that the Punjabis and the military decided that this was not acceptable. I mean, part of the proposal of the Awami League was that, yes, Sheikh Mujib would be prime minister, but they wanted to have more independence. I mean, they wanted to have certain aspects of governance done on a regional basis. I mean, it would be more of a, maybe federation is not the right word, but that the central government would have defense and foreign policy and so on, and then there would be a lot of legislation that was decentralized. But then this wasn't going. There were lots of discussions during March 1971, which ended in a stalemate, and that's what led to the civil disobedience and the general strikes. And so there were like hartals, general strikes, and curfews called by the what was then still the military government.
Right. And I guess it didn't help that there was a cyclone right before that, and that it wasn't managed as well as they would have expected. I don't know if Oxfam had any role to play during that cyclone or helping the victims there, because I remember that seemed to really trigger a lot of unrest among the people. That I think the allotted budgets for Bangladesh were closer to 60%, but those they spent like less than 30% or around 30% instead. So that created a lot
Yeah,
of unrest, is what I
yeah,
hear.
that's it's quite true. The Pakistan government were very slow to react to this enormous tragedy, and even though pretty accurate estimates of death was nearer 600,000 in the cyclone. Now in the history books, it's more or less written as 500,000. But the uh, the government of Pakistan eventually agreed a figure of 267,000, but it was definitely more than that. And in the field operations that Oxfam was involved with, and not with teams of Oxfam people, but working through organizations like CARE, which of course was set up in the USA before that. Um, that the relief supplies didn't get to the Bengalis as quickly as they would have got to Punjabis affected in the same way. And so right at the beginning of the whole crackdown on Bengalis, I think it was Yahya Khan who said, "Well, if you kill a few million, the rest will give up," and the meaning kill a few million Hindus and the rest will give up. And right at the beginning, uh, my Oxfam boss, who had just come to Eastern India, he happened to be a person who had worked in East Pakistan from 1958 to 65. He was a Catholic brother, um, and right at the beginning of the tragedy of the refugees, he said there could easily be 10 million. And he was basing that on that the most of the refugees would be Hindu. In actual fact, the statistics weren't that well kept. They were well kept in terms of numbers of people coming to the refugee camps, but not neither the breakdown necessarily was accurately recorded, nor were the figures of deaths in the refugee camps accurately recorded. But in the camps where Oxfam was working, we found about 60% Hindu and 40% Muslim. In other places, it was more like 70-30 or 80-20. But so it varied. And the numbers were overwhelming. I mean, the state of Tripura at that time had a population of, I think, only 450,000, and there were many more refugees in Tripura than the normal population. So you can imagine the pressure that put on civil administration as well.
Right. Absolutely. And I think you're right about the numbers, though. I mean, of course, there has been no real documentation. Even when the Pakistan India creation in 1947, there was really the estimates that they make of the number of deaths is close to, say, 1 million or 2 million, around that. And the displaced people or refugees was around, I think, 15 million or something like that. So but here you're saying 10 million refugees. I think that's a number I've read in many places. And also the number that, it was around maybe 70-30, 70% or 80% were Hindus, and rest Muslims. So it really created a big influx into India. And I think one of the big issues also was how women were really, treated badly during this whole issue. And especially the army were targeting women, and many mass rapes, gang rapes happen in a very targeted manner. So these are some of the war crimes that really happened at that particular time. And then this was a 10-month affair, and which ended with the 13-day war with India, the India-Pakistan war. That is sort of the long and short of it. But I guess, Julian Bai, I want to ask you about the testimony of 60. I think at least there was some attempt made during this Bangladesh war and afterwards to document some of the testimonies of people who were witness to these war crimes. I know you played an instrumental part in that as well. Please.
Well, that's right. I mean, to begin with, Pakistan were denying any of the stories that were coming out about atrocities and mass killing or killing of civilians. But there were one or two journalists who were not deported right at the beginning, at March the 26th. So they were able to get information out, and gradually that came out. But the Western governments were really, to begin with, saying this is an internal affair of Pakistan, and so we can think about the humanitarian issues, but we can't get involved in the politics. Whereas that was quite ridiculous, because the Pakistan army were killing unarmed civilians because they happened to be Bengali, or they happened to be people who had voted for the Awami League. So it took time. It wasn't until a journalist who was actually based in Pakistan, but he had come on an official Pakistan government journalist's visit in April, and he saw, his name was Anthony Mascarenhas, and he saw and learnt what had been going on, but he was also a correspondent for the Sunday Times in London. But he realized that if his story got published, then he would probably be killed and his family would be in danger. So he managed to go to London, talk to the editor of the Sunday Times, and then go back to Pakistan, West Pakistan. And when he and his family were safely out of the country, then the story could be published. So that was a big broadsheet newspaper, pages of his reports, and that blew it in the middle of June. And it was only then that the stories that we were sending to Oxfam, then everybody started believing what we were saying. So there was a big shift, but it was very difficult to keep the situation the refugee relief situation in the front pages of newspapers. To begin with, it was there. Then when there was a cholera epidemic, it became front page again. And of course, with Anthony Mascarenhas's reports. But then as things, and when the refugee camps got flooded during the monsoon, again, more media coverage. But by August, September, there wasn't a lot of political movement, really. How long is this going to go on? And although we were always planning 3 or 4 months ahead, because we needed to plan whether it was for supplementary food or medical or personnel within India, personnel, or clothing, or looking ahead to the winter blankets and so on. The people in Oxfam head office said we need to make some document to shock the world, and so very quickly, so that the document could be released for the UN Security Council in October, then we, head office and us in Calcutta, collected statements from many famous people, and that was the testimony of 60, which you can see here.
Right.
And one of the leading documents is from Edward Kennedy, and then Mother Teresa, some of the very distinguished international correspondents who had even covered the Second World War and the Korean War and the Vietnam War. Their documents are there, and then lots of individual eyewitness accounts of aid agency people or members of Parliament from the British Houses of Parliament. They came to see, so then this document was published October the 21st, and then handed to all the UN ambassadors, as well as being distributed to European heads of state and so on. And remarkably, only a week after this was published, Senator Edward Kennedy took it to the US Senate on October the 28th, and he raised it as this is evidence of what is happening in Bengal, meaning both sides, and asked for it to be accepted as evidence of what the situation is. And remarkably, there was no opposition to that proposal by him. And he had been in the refugee camps in August, partly organized by us on the ground through Oxfam America. So the whole text of the testimony of 60, not the photos, the whole text was reproduced in the congressional record.
Yes, that played such an instrumental part in the whole, propagation of the idea of the level of atrocities that were happening, the war crimes that were happening on the ground. So I think this was a great contribution by you and by Oxfam to bring this situation to light. And like you mentioned, Anthony Mascarenhas, right? That's the name. He was his articles and his write-ups, I think played also a very instrumental part in India getting more involved and finally agreeing to, intervene, which till then I think India was sort of biding its time and trying to build diplomatic efforts. Right?
Well, that's true, but on the other hand, even before the monsoon actually started remarkably early, or that's what my memory tells me, that it started raining in April and went on and on raining. But even at an early stage, the Prime Minister of India, Indira Gandhi, was keen to do something about it, because India was not a rich economy in those days, and it was very difficult to look after so many million extra people. But the General Manekshaw, the head of the armed forces, said, we cannot interfere now. It would be very, very difficult moving troops, moving equipment during the monsoon. And that's basically why there was no military involvement. Certainly the liberation war, the freedom fighters got training and assistance, equipment from the Indians, whether you call that unofficial or not. But so that was going on, and as a result of that, the freedom fighters started creating a lot of problems for the Pakistan army in terms of blowing up supplies or links or bridges and so on. So it was there were a lot of, in November, the pressure, there were lots of crossfire across the border. Not officially, the war had started, and indeed we had to withdraw medical personnel from refugee camps quite near the border, and that was done in collaboration with the Indian Army. The Indian Army said, our medical guys will look after the refugees. If your medical guys further away from the border will look after our soldiers. Well, of course, officially, Oxfam could not be doing that, but one turned a blind eye to arrangements on the ground. But the war only officially started when, for some extraordinary reason, Pakistan Air Force bombed, I think it was 9 or 11 airfields, Indian airfields in northern India, did a daylight bombing raid. Well, obviously that triggered the fact that India was officially at war. So, I mean, that was the button that was pressed by Pakistan Air Force, dropping World War II bombs in different places in northern India, which didn't do a huge amount of damage, but it was an act of war.
That is a very interesting revelation. I don't think I had an idea about this, that they started the war, Pakistan started the war, because I know that Sam Manekshaw was clearly biding time for the monsoons to abate, like you mentioned, because he felt like, the terrain there, being the delta terrain, would not have been a very comfortable one for the army to win the war. But this so this is a good information for all of us to have. I think we are getting questions from the audience, but before that, I just want to read out some of the testimony. Like, one of my favorite testimony is, of course, of Senator Kennedy. And he actually did say that, I think that the only crime Mujib is guilty of is winning an election. The question of the trial being secret is an outrage to every concept of international law. So I think his testimony in the Congress is really what we still look at. And also he mentioned about the genocidal consequences of what Pakistan was doing, Pakistani army was doing. I have a question here from Priya Saha, who's actually an activist in this she's herself from Bangladesh and works in this field. And that her first question is, please suggest to us how we can get recognition from the USA Congress. How can we get recognition for this genocide? Because that's one important thing to note, that even though it's a well-known genocide, the Bangladesh genocide has not really gotten that sort of widespread recognition or awareness in the broader public as it should.
Well, that's absolutely true, and in fact, there is a forum here, which was set up, I think, in the late 90s. It's the Forum for Secular Bangladesh, but one of the campaigns they've been involved with is to get recognition that the genocide of 1971 should be officially declared as genocide, and indeed I am officially an advisor to this forum, and we've had a number of meetings, and as a result of one of the meetings, that there is now March the 25th is officially National Genocide Day, and that was only officially agreed in, I think, 4 years ago. And then I've written a number of articles which have been published in documents that the forum have published, and but also in the media, where to get the world to declare, or the UN or whatever body it is, to declare that the genocide of 1971 should be regarded in the same way as the Holocaust or the Armenian genocide, then countries such as, say, the UK should be taking a decision in Parliament there. And I suggested in things I've written is that British Bangladeshis, who are members of Parliament there, should be taking the lead to raise this and get it going in countries, in member states of the UN. I don't know the legal side of how that can happen, but after all, one of the members of Parliament in the UK is the niece of the current Prime Minister in Bangladesh. So that's a good place to start.
That's a very good. Again, I think your nuggets of information are really, really helping us, Julian Bai. I had no idea Sheikh Hasina's daughter is part of the political process in UK. I think that should be a good place to start. And here also, I know that Joe Biden recently recognized the Armenian genocide, officially within the United States as well. And I think we sort of know the campaign that went behind it. So I think that is something we really need to initiate here to make sure that it's recognized that 1971 was a major genocide. And also, I think one of the things I want to share is that recently there was this, which I'm sure you're aware of, genocide museum and archives were established, I believe, in Bangladesh itself for 1971. So that will have official records and
Well, the one is in CoHNA, but of course the genocide is covered very well in the new Liberation War Museum, which was only opened a few years ago, and that was designed and it's been set up as a museum as opposed to what used to be in an old rented building, which was a very effective museum, but there wasn't enough space for all the exhibits and the artifacts and everything else. And that the Liberation War Museum now has a lot of the genocide stuff there.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, one of the exhibits in the Liberation War Museum is the testimony of 60.
Oh, great. Okay. So yeah, that's something I guess we will do a small, a, maybe an exhibit here in United States. Thank you so much for sharing that document. Also, the testimony of 60, I think is a powerful document that really gives us an insight into what happened, during that time. And another question that came in is, Senator, Pushpita Prasad, who also works as an active human rights, leader within CoHNA. Senator Kennedy's words are so haunting and powerful. And how could the world allow such a genocide to happen less than 25 years after the Holocaust? I just want to quickly mention one of the comments Senator Kennedy made in November 1971. He said, "Nothing is more clear or more easily documented than the systematic campaign of terror and its genocidal consequences launched by the Pakistan Army on the night of March 25th. Hardest hit have been members of the Hindu community who have been robbed of their lands and shops, systematically slaughtered, and in some places painted with yellow patches marked H." So this was part of his testimony on the floor of the Congress. But I wonder if Julian Bai, if you remember, what exactly was the impact on the people when they heard about this genocide happening 25 years after the Holocaust? What was the kind of impact it made in the world?
I think a lot of people say in the UK didn't well it wasn't affecting them, and so they were not so deeply bothered about it, I would say, and I think even in India, people couldn't believe some of the stories that were coming out, and although initially it was understood that some people thought only Hindus will be killed, but that certainly wasn't the case, and a lot of I think it's easy with hindsight, but a lot more should have been done immediately after the birth of Bangladesh to collect the eyewitness accounts of what had happened in each individual village. But then people were more worried about how to survive, how to live, how to eat than collecting information of who died or who became sick or something. Even, we hear stories many years later, only 20 miles out of, or less than 20 miles out of Dhaka, in an area which has a very good community, almost balanced between Christians, Hindus, and Muslims. And that was where some of the early Portuguese people came, and one of the earliest churches was built there. Only a few years ago, I learned about a mass grave of Catholics was found, and we hadn't heard about that before. At the same time, in the Garo tribal areas of North Bangladesh, again, we heard of atrocities against the Christian tribal people there. There's a story which I have repeated in some of my writing, where a Pakistan major asked some tribal boys, saying that his soldiers urgently needed blood, and would they, as a humanitarian, help with blood. And so a few young men lay down on cots, and needles were inserted into their veins, and their blood was drained, and nobody could go near them, and they died because their blood was drained out of their bodies. That is the sort of torture or atrocity, an example of an extraordinary atrocity. And other eyewitness accounts of the men folk being killed, bayoneted to death, or bayoneted in front of the women and children, and then the bayonet didn't kill the men, but then they were shot, and all this was done in front of family members. So having listened to those sort of stories, it is perhaps it's easy to understand that actually I didn't talk about or write about my 1971 experiences for many years. It was just, I blocked it out. It was too difficult to think about. A lot of people who experienced comrades dying in the Second World War also didn't talk about their experiences. And it was only when I went with a friend in 2006 to the old Liberation War Museum, and we were going around an exhibition of things related to the Prime Minister in exile, Tajuddin Ahmed, who was the Prime Minister in exile in 1971. And there were some of his letters. He had beautiful handwriting and photos and so on. And he was one of the 4 leaders who were murdered in the Dhaka jail by the assassins of Sheikh Mujib. Sheikh Mujib was assassinated along with most of his family in August 1975, and the 4 leaders who had been ministers were put in jail, and they were actually murdered in jail in November. And so there was this little exhibition about Tajuddin, probably his birth centenary or something. And I mentioned to my friend, oh, I met Tajuddin in Calcutta a number of times and so on. That was overheard by one of the trustees of the Liberation War Museum, Tariq Ali. And then he approached me when we were leaving, and then he is the person who got me to talk more about it, and so gradually I've been writing and talking, and it is very sad that last year he phoned me up, and during the pandemic last year, and he was phoning me up to check on my health, because he said, you and I are both the same age, and we are told that the coronavirus is more likely to hit us. And so I'm just phoning to find out. And he was also saying that remember, there aren't many of us who have fought in 2 wars. And he said we were both involved with the Liberation War, and because we were both born at the end of the Second World War, we know very well when Hitler knew of our birth, he knew he had no chance. So he had a wonderful sense of humor, and he knew that my date of birth is the day on which Hitler decided to commit suicide. So it was desperately sad for me and many others that within 2 months of that phone call with Tariq Ali, he passed away because of COVID. And so then I was ill with COVID earlier this year, but I had already had one of the AstraZeneca vaccines. So it wasn't as bad as it might have been, but it was still quite bad. And I am still having the after effects of what they call long COVID. So I remember people like Tariq Ali, who was part of a singing troupe that went around in 1971. He was a young man then, well, the same age as me. So we were both 25, 26. So he was with a singing troupe going around giving great support, rousing freedom fighters, and the troupe also came to the refugee camps and gave great support to the refugees, to remind them to keep going, to keep their spirits up, because you will be able to come back to your country. So yeah, quite emotional remembering that.
I'm sure. So I'm so glad you recovered from that COVID infection. I wish you the best of health and recovery from that. It's just touching, like you said, to hear about that. And singing and music is part of that whole ethos of Bengal. Whether it's East Bengal, West Bengal, it's part of that soil.
Right.
Yeah, people there always have music in their heart, in their soul, on their lips.
Yes, that's right.
Right. And so I'm sure that definitely helped the spirits in that really difficult time. I guess, we have had a really, really wonderful discussion with you. I do want to tell people that we have a 25-minute documentary right after that, which has precious testimonies and words from people who were important during that, have either been eyewitnesses or children who have seen their parents and heard from their parents secondhand accounts of those days. So it's a documentary that Julian Pai has shared with me, and I really, really appreciate your sharing that with us. I do want you to touch upon that, the Friends of 71 and that event. I know that, it's interesting when I was looking at the history of Bangladesh and its prime ministers. Most of them have not served the 5-year terms except for Khalida Zia and Sheikh Hasina, who have had long innings, and completed their terms. But Sheikh Hasina, when she was in the prime minister's seat, I think she initiated some of these moves. Maybe it would be great to hear from you about that.
Yeah, when she was prime minister in 1996 to 2001, at that time there was a proposal to honor foreigners who had contributed in some way in 1971, and they for some reason, or whoever had worked it out, had proposed 4 different categories. And then somebody quite sensibly said that if you have 4 different categories, then people will feel jealous if they are put in the lower category. I mean, it won't look quite right. Why is he in a higher category than me? So that didn't happen then. And then when they came back into power, this was revived, and they recommended that there would be 2 categories: one for kings, queens, presidents, prime ministers, and the other one for everybody else. And so that's how it started. And so the first person who was honored with a Liberation War honor was, of course, most of the people named or their names proposed would be receiving them posthumously. And so the first one that was awarded in the name of Indira Gandhi. And so Sonia Gandhi came here, I think in 2010, it may have been 2011, I don't remember exactly. And so that was the first one. And then they started doing it in on a batch system, so that the first batch was in March 2012. And so when the names were announced, and in different nationalities, of course, a lot of them Indian names, and then in the British list, for instance, there was the name of Edward Heath, who had been prime minister, the Conservative prime minister in the 1971, and the leader of the opposition, Harold Wilson, who had earlier been prime minister and was going to be a prime minister later on. And my reaction, if you excuse my language, when I saw their names, I said to somebody, what the bloody hell did they do in 1971? And then it turned out, that the leader of the opposition, the Labour Party, was very strong on ensuring that humanitarian aid came for the refugees. And and also from the ruling party, they agreed with that, and they authorized the use of Royal Air Force transport planes bringing some of the relief supplies of organizations like Oxfam. And but also, what I hadn't learned, I didn't know, that when there were UN Security Council resolutions by the United States, which were in any case going to be vetoed by the Soviet Union, who were supporting India and Bangladesh at that time. So, but the UK normally would have been usually going along with the US. They abstained in a number of votes, and that was seen as a very pro-Bangladesh, pro-India stance. So that's how that explanation. But in the group, when I received this honor, there were members of the there was like William Saxby was one of the senators honored at that time, and his son came to receive that honor. But there were a number of Americans and a number of other nationalities. About 80 people were honored at the same time as I received that. And I received, it was interesting that, I mean, whoever had proposed my name, then I informed Oxfam in Bangladesh that my name had been put forward, and then Oxfam were not very happy that my name was put forward and not Oxfam's name. So in the end, there were some organizations that received the award as well, including Oxfam and the International Red Cross and All India Radio, I think, and one or two other organizations. So that was quite interesting as well.
I think the politics is always interesting, I mean, the fact is that, of course, while Nixon and Kissinger completely ignored, Archer Blood, who kept as a consul general in Bangladesh at that time, he tried to, tell U.S. The Pentagon that, look, this is how the situation is on the ground, but I don't think he received much traction. The previous event that I did in March, Julian Bhai, was about the blood telegram and just the entire, politics around it, and also the sort of the, silence of Nixon and Kissinger on this whole situation. Like, they did not really support it. They were more involved with handling the China-US relationship at that time, and also the Pakistan relationship. So,
And Archer Blood was honored with the Friends of Liberation War honor at the same time when I received my award, and his daughter Barbara Blood, she received the award in his name. So, and I think in the big photos, of the group of us receiving the award, I think Barbara Blood is sitting, if not next to me, but very close to me.
Yes, and her testimony is in this Friends of 71 video too, right?
Yes, that's right.
So we'll be showing you the video in probably a couple of minutes, but I want to ask you one last question. And I know that this whole situation with minorities that you mentioned, whether it's the Christian graveyard that was discovered, or some of the Hindu persecution and property, snatching that happens. I think a lot of it is part. Even though Bangladesh, first, there are two things about Bangladesh. One is that it is considered democracy and a secular country, but it does have that is some of the laws which are carryover from the East Pakistan time when they used to have this Enemy Property Act, under which a lot of the Hindus actually used to lose their land and property. So I'm just wondering if anything has changed, because we do keep hearing some of the news about
There, yeah,
persecution.
I think there are some leading Hindus, including members of parliament, that have been doing a lot, and people who are in this forum of secular Bangladesh. They are also very outspoken about laws that haven't been sorted out, and indeed, the there are often people are when there is news of an atrocity against a Hindu community or family, often that is more connected with property than religion, and it is sometimes blown out of proportion, and so that is a problem. But remember that when the military people were running the country, Zia and then Ershad, no Hindus were recruited into the military.
Mm-hmm.
And when Sheikh Hasina came, initially when she came back, then I think 20, immediately 20 Christians were, oh no, 20 Hindus were recruited, 5 Christians, 5 Buddhists, and they then got established in the military. And when Khalida Zia came back as Prime Minister, I understand that their service was cancelled.
Yes.
But you will find that there are a number of Hindus in important positions in civil administration as well. One of the big development projects that I was a technical assistance team leader, the project director was a Hindu. Of course, they are on deputation from the government, so they come for 3 years. Then there's another person, but he was a senior person. So the openings are better than they were. Let's put it that way.
Yes, totally. I totally remember that when Khalida Zia was became the prime minister. I think there was almost like 100-day, targeted attack on some of the Hindu properties, and I think that was in the news as well. And many.
Well, that was when she got elected in 2001.
2000.
So then there were extreme Muslims, I would say,
Mm-hmm.
who went to teach the Hindus a lesson. So they would say, "You see, we won. Don't you dare support Sheikh Hasina? Right, we are punishing you."
Right.
So that was basically it.
You said it, because frankly, at this time in West Bengal, in India, we are seeing some of a similar trend. We are getting news of that, but really nothing has been done about it, either by the central government or by the state government. But that is a situation of whether it's East Bengal or West Bengal. something really concerning. And I do want to end with one of the notes from Professor Abul Barakat of Dhaka University, who actually said that there will be no Hindus left within Bangladesh within 30 years. The rate of the exodus has been so high, people fleeing Bangladesh and coming to India has been really high. And that is why India is enacting this law called the CAA. Hopefully it will make its way and help some of these refugees who are fleeing persecution on the ground. But Julian Bhai, your account and the information and nuggets that you've shared has really educated people like me and everyone here. There's lots of thank you notes for you from our audience, and really thank you so much. Very, very grateful to you for helping us understand your first-hand account of everything that happened in Bangladesh.
Well, thank you. Yes.
I will be in touch, and we are going to show the Friends of 71 documentary now for the next 25 minutes. And I hope everyone really sees it. There's accounts of, P.N. Huxer's daughter. There's accounts of Archer Blood's daughter. There's accounts of from you, Julian Bhai, and from Simon Dring. You also mentioned that he was a journalist and he passed on, you mentioned to me.
Yeah, a few days ago.
And also I think Brigadier Jacob, he was also part of the war, liberation war, India-Pakistan war that happened at that time. Right. So a lot of these are really interesting, and of course Kennedy, he's in there too. So
yes.
Please don't miss this documentary. And I know it's very late for you, Julian Bhai. So thank you so much for staying up with us and educating.
Will there be any questions after the documentary?
No. I took all the questions right away.
Right. Okay.
So, but I will be in touch with you, and hopefully we'll do something more, in the future, because we are going to carry on such programs until December. And because there's so many layers to unpack of this whole issue that we really need to bring out each of these aspects and record them for posterity.
Right. Okay, well, very good. Well, perhaps I will be able to watch some of your other programs.
I will keep you in the loop for sure.
Right. Okay.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Thank you. Sohini, over to you. Thank you so much.
My name's Simon Dring. I worked for the London Daily Telegraph 40 years ago, this was. And I was in Cambodia when my office in London called and said, would I go to Dhaka? Because the political situation there was getting very tense. So I arrived here on March the 6th, 1971, March the 7th at the racecourse when Sheikh Mujib gave that famous speech. And I was actually standing on the platform only a few yards away from him. I don't speak Bengali, but I have to say, listening to him, seeing the reaction of this huge crowd there, I understood everything that was going on. There was that one phrase in particular where he said, the struggle now is a struggle for our emancipation. The struggle now is the struggle for our independence. Joy Banga. Joy Bangla! And I promise you, the hairs almost stood up on the back of my neck because I didn't understand it, but I understood it.
My name is Kirsten Westergaard, and I came to Bangladesh in February of 71. Down in Kumila, we were sitting in front of the radio, thought we could listen to the speech, but the radio was cut off, so we never heard the speech. People thought that we should go to Dhaka. They said that women and children should be evacuated. But I'm a political scientist. If you're a political scientist, you really want to be in a place like this, where something is going on with nation building and everything. So I said, no, Ami Jabuna, I am not going. Every afternoon, Sheikh Mujib would then come out on this very balcony where we are sitting now, and we would all be in the garden, and we would listen to his speech, and that we would do more or less every afternoon. The last time was on the 25th, but he did not come out. So we could feel that something was in the air.
The first warning bells were sounded around about 5 o'clock on the afternoon of March 25th when we heard that Yahya Khan had left. Certainly the whole city began to become a little bit uneven and unstable. Some troops appeared outside the hotel here. This was the Intercontinental then, and this is where most of the journalists were based who were covering the situation. There were up to 200 journalists here. And clearly they were not encouraging or allowing you to leave.
Around midnight or a little before, we heard shotguns, and then we went to the top of the roof. And from there you could see Dhaka burning, especially down in Old Dhaka, where the Hindus live, and over at the university.
That's when we knew, given the scale of the killing that was obviously taking place in this city, the scale of the massacre, because it was a one-sided thing, there was nobody shooting back, that they were never going to let us out to see what was going on.
And of course, the next day there was curfew, and we couldn't go out. We heard over the radio that Bangladesh had been declared independent.
On behalf of our great national leader, the Supreme Commander of Bangladesh, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, do hereby proclaim the independence of Bangladesh.
On the evening of the 26th, about 24 hours later, when there was still shooting going on, Pakistani intelligence officer, Major Siddiqui, came to the hotel, and he spread the word out amongst the journalists that civil war had broken out, and that for our own safety, because we might be killed by these Bengali buggers, he called them, he said, we're going to take you out of the country. I said, well, is this an order? Oh, no, it's not an order, just for your own safety. So I said to him, so I don't have to leave then, I can stay. He said, you can, but it might be dangerous for you. So I said, well, what will happen if I stay? And he said, well, there might be a party for you, whatever that meant.
The journalists, they were told to leave on the 25th in the afternoon. And all of them left except two, Simon Drinks and a French photographer.
I escaped that by coming up onto the roof and hiding actually down here under what was then an air conditioning unit. And in this way, I felt a little bit secure, but at the same time, I could go to the edge of the roof and see when the journalists who had been rounded up by the Pakistan army were taken away. Once they went, of course, then I knew that I'd be safe, and made my way to find the Bengali staff at the reception, who were very excited. And they said, there's somebody else stayed as well, Michel Laurent of AP, a photographer. The next morning, they had arranged for a little baker's van. We put on kurta pajama, I mean, some attempt to disguise ourselves anyway. We got in the back of this little van. The first port of call we went to was the Dhaka University. And I have to say that it was an appalling sight. In the dormitories of Iqbal Hall, there was a lot of blood. I saw a student dead in his bed. There were students lying in the lake. of dead bodies. I couldn't identify all these. And quite clearly, the army had come in, they'd mortared the dormitory area, then they'd gone in and just shot people. And the students probably sat there thinking, oh, they'll just arrest us, but they were mistaken. We went to the Hindu area and to the old part of the city. A market area had also been attacked, and about 200 yards of houses had been burnt down. There were people dead in front of their shops. You could see as we went around that the whole areas where the flags had been flying, the Bangladeshi flags, were all taken down and replaced by Pakistani flags. After several hours moving around this city, Michelle and I realized that the scale of the massacres here were really extensive. The problem we then had was, how do we get this film out? How do we get my notes out? We spread the cameras around a bit. We hid the film in the bottom of a sponge bag underneath soap and toothpaste. I put all my notes in my socks, under my feet. And Michelle and I were taken by security guards into the plane. The plane took off. It was like the most fantastic feeling. I wrote my story and filed it. These were the first documentation of the scale of the Pakistani massacres in Dhaka.
My name is Barbara Blood Rankin. My father is Archer Blood. He was the consul general in Dhaka. The war broke out, and he sent information back to the United States via telegrams. He pretty much condemned the United States stand, which was supporting West Pakistan. Washington, D.C., and the ambassador in Pakistan made light of what was going on. So the telegrams got progressively more and more strongly worded. Well, one of the telegrams was considered the most strongly worded communique ever received by a Foreign Service officer. And it became known as the Blood Telegram. I believe the most likely eventual outcome of the struggle underway in East Pakistan is a Bengali victory and the consequent establishment of an independent Bangladesh. Here in Dhaka, we are mute and horrified witnesses to a reign of terror by the Pakistani military.
We heard that refugees were flooding across the border. We saw 10,000, 20,000 a day at one crossing point. My name is Julian Francis, and in 1971, I was Oxfam's special representative in Calcutta. We were really involved with the medical, sanitation, clothing, feeding for, to begin with, 500,000, but it grew to 600,000. The biggest relief operation Oxfam had ever undertaken in its history till then.
My name is Michael Barnes, and in 1971 I was a Labour Member of Parliament in the British House of Commons. And I wanted, as a politician, to find out the political situation, to understand it. We went visiting the refugee camps, the big camp outside Calcutta. We then flew round to Agartala to see the condition of the refugees there. We had a meeting with the Prime Minister in exile, Tajuddin Ahmed. We also met General Usmani and his freedom fighter.
I'm here to remember my father, Ronald Garst, Dr. Ronald Garst. He's an orthopedic surgeon. He was in India. The war broke out, and his first reaction was that he must help the war wounded. He was not a politician. He was not an activist. So he knew that he could not change the course of time that way. But what he could do was to be a humanitarian.
nearly everybody who could see what was happening at first hand was clear that the only way this situation could end for Bangladesh was the intervention of India. And indeed, it was in India's self-interest to intervene rather than to have this happening on its borders.
My name is Nandita Haksar, and I'm here to represent my father, Parmeshwar Narayan Haksar. In 1971, he was the secretary to the Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, and I do remember the first people who were escaping from Bangladesh coming to our house. And they were people who were later in the Bangladesh government. These people were actually, they had come to my father to lobby for Bangladesh. And I think it was an atmosphere in which I think all Indians felt this tremendous solidarity with Bengali nationalism.
I was working for the Ministry of External Affairs of the Government of India, and they decided to set up an office in Calcutta to liaise with the Bangladesh government in exile. And I was trying to work out the day-to-day nitty-gritty of just survival, finding places for the Bangladesh government to stay in, a lot of logistics. And the other level was messages from my government to the government of Bangladesh in exile.
I was responsible for planning and building up the logistics. You can't fight without weapons, with ammunition, food. Logistics is very important. Logistics was a major problem in 1971. It takes time to build up all these things. The infrastructure, roads had to be constructed. For instance, in Tripura, there was only one battalion. We had to build up the infrastructure for a complete corps. So 30,000 tons of stores were moved to Tripura, that during the monsoon.
World opinion needed time to come round to the view that this was the only outcome that was possible, a new, independent, free Bangladesh. So I think there had to be a diplomatic offensive.
We were trying to work out how to shock the world into doing something. So the idea was collect statements from people like Senator Edward Kennedy, Mother Teresa, and many of the well-known journalists of that time.
I come as the chairman of the Senate Refugee Committee, someone who's been greatly interested in the...
Senator Kennedy introduced it to the Senate. Then that had quite an influence on stopping arms being supplied to Pakistan.
We were a citizens group focused on influencing American foreign policy, and a wide group of people came together, mainly Americans, and then we were joined by some very extraordinary Bengalis to lobby on Capitol Hill and to promote an amendment to the foreign aid bill called the Saxby-Church Amendment, which would stop foreign aid to Pakistan.
My father, Bill Saxby, was a United States Senator from Ohio. He was on the Armed Services Committee. He became aware of the humanitarian crisis in Bangladesh, and with several other senators introduced measures to stop further economic and military aid to Pakistan. This was successful against the wishes of the administration, as expressed by Mr. Kissinger and Mr. Nixon.
We wrote this letter to the Danish government and the Danish parliament, and we wrote this little pamphlet about Bangladesh, which gives the situation from when Pakistan was formed and the relationship between West Pakistan and East Pakistan. On the back, we wrote, Joy Bangla.
I want to give some bread and to stop it bad, 'cause it really my husband covered the war story, I knew he wanted to become a war correspondent like Robert Capa. So I knew no way to stop him. And he promised me to return home safely. So I just believed it. He just tried hard to let the Japanese people know what is happening in Bangladesh using various media. I think he tried hard.
I did shoot a lot of footage during your War for Independence, and I did make a film. Well, I wanted very much to reflect the culture, the everyday lives. I wanted to show the beauty, and I wanted to contrast that with the brutality that had been inflicted on them, and how no matter how far the depth of their pain was, they were so stoic. I was so fortunate to be able to join with a troupe of magnificent entertainers, unique individuals that could sing a verse and just rouse you in a way that would make you want to fight for your country. And we were so lucky to follow them, trying to soothe the refugees and cheer the Mukta Bahini. It was really thrilling, and feeling like you were doing your part. It's about as close to heaven as I think I'll ever get.
So I've talked while I'm here in Bangladesh with Mukti Bahini and people who are really doing the fight on the ground. And I think they were aware of the support that they had from people all over the world. And so this was one way for some of us to express that support and to take action to do things that we believed in.
I remember the time when the planes were going over Dhaka University. My father brought the transcripts of the exchanges between the Pakistani pilots. And they were very cold-bloodedly saying that we are reaching Dhaka University, now drop the bombs, and it was something which even now I sort of get goose pimples thinking about.
On the 14th evening, Niazi and Farman Ali went to the American consul, Spivak, with the following proposal: ceasefire under UN, hand over the government to UN, withdrawal under UN. It was given to Bhutto, who was attending United Nations. He rejected it outright.
I will not be a party to it. We will fight. We'll go back and fight. My country hearkens for me. Why should I waste my time here in the Security Council? I will not be a party to the ignominious surrender of part of my country. You can take your Security Council. Here you are. I'm going.
On the 16th morning, a ceasefire was converted into an unconditional surrender in 4 hours. The surrender of 93,000 troops took place. This never happened before, larger than the surrender of von Paulus at Stalingrad.
And it was very satisfying to see independence arrive. One of the best things really for me was on the 27th, we were able to see all the Bangladeshi flags coming down, the Pakistani ones going up. But then 9 months later in December, when I came back here, and I rode down from Mymensingh with the Mukti Bahini from Tangail and with the Indian tanks, and I was here in December 16, was to see all the Pakistani flags coming down and the Bangladeshi flags going up again.
I remember the journey I made in January 1972. The road from Calcutta to Jessore was jam-packed with refugees going home. there was a mixture of happiness, joy, relief, and fear. What will they find when they go home? But there was a lot of shouting of Joy Bangla.
When Mujibur Rahman was still in Pakistan, and my father was on the phone, and I remember him holding this black phone which was came scrambled messages, and he was tense because we weren't sure whether Mujib would be actually put in the plane by the Pakistanis or he would be killed. And as a child, I was sitting there looking, and the house was totally silent, and there was this tremendous tension. It was tangible tension. And then he was saying, what has happened? Have they put him in? What has happened? And then they said, they've put him on the plane. And there's still this silence, because even if they put him on the plane, we didn't know what would happen. And then he's boarded the plane and the plane is taken off. And then Papa turned around and told us that he's out. And there was this celebration.
Sheikh Mujibur Rahman returned to Dhaka in one of the most emotional outbursts in that part of the world.
To be here when Sheikh Mujib came out of prison and returned to Bangladesh. And I have to say, I climbed onto the back of the truck, and the atmosphere was fantastic. I was there on March the 7th, and now to see him coming back, it was like completing the circle in the history of the independence of Bangladesh. And I'm very glad and very honored to have been part of that.
To work day and night for a cause you believe in, and then to see that cause unfold and be successful, it's more than a thrill of a lifetime. It's an experience of a lifetime.
I feel a tremendous sense of gratitude. And I don't know of any other country which has ever said thank you.
We accept the honors that you have awarded to us with grateful thanks and with humility. Long may Bangladesh flourish. Joy Bangla!
You know, the people who deserve the most recognition are the people of this country. I think of the young Bengalis in the hotel here who helped keep us hidden, who helped us get around the city. They're the ones who we really should honor today.
All right, then we're back. Julian, thank you for staying for the show all the way. I know it's very late for you, but any last minute comments from you? You're on mute.
I saw some of the comments, some I wouldn't agree with, but anyway, that's for another discussion, I think.
We should have another discussion, for sure.
Yeah.
I haven't seen all the comments, but yeah, if you have some couple of lines to talk, I'm good with that. But other than that, I think this was a fantastic, beautiful documentary. Thank you for sharing it with us.
No, I think the plan had been originally to interview many people from different batches, because and then make a much bigger, more comprehensive film, but that never happened. So this was only the first batch.
Got it. So are they planning more such documentaries?
I don't think so, and I think there are some more people who they had wanted to honor, but I think all that has just got pushed away for the time being because of the coronavirus pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Right. But I think this has been precious for us, because many of us have just heard about it. We haven't really seen much. And so hearing your testimony and also the testimony of 60 and all of those important, pieces that were part of this documentary, I think that really helped us get just an image and understanding of what really happened on the ground. So thank you very much, Julian G. And thank you for sharing your time with us. and your thoughts and insights. And I thank everyone who attended and who asked questions, and we will come back with more on this topic.
Well, I look forward to meeting you again.
Namaste. Namaste, Julian. Bye. Namaste to everybody.